Hello my small fat adaptive family and welcome back to the Keto Kitchen's Keto Guide. Today we're going to be talking about how ketosis can affect menstruation, or more commonly called periods. This is a subject I don't have much personal experience in. Instead, I've done a lot of research as usual and I've spoken to people in the community that have experience with it for sort of their personal anecdotes on top. Firstly, it's important to note that menstruation isn't just a week or so of bleeding. Periods bring symptoms like cramps, bloating, bowel issues, acne, weight fluctuations, joint pain, headaches, fatigue, irritability, as well as other known emotional changes. These symptoms are believed to be because of the sudden change in the hormones. More specifically, how estrogen changes throughout a person's menstrual cycle. So, at the end of a period, the hormone estrogen will slowly start to rise and peak about 2 weeks after. The estrogen will then drop like a sack of spuds, only to then rise again just before your period starts. Now, we gotta give women a lot of credit where it's due. Their hormones are on a roller coaster ride constantly just to regulate their menstrual cycle, and people like me are over here basically writing my will when I get a cold. Now, I know any women or person that has a menstrual cycle likely has a very strong understanding of everything I've just said, but I think it's important to reiterate because this isn't so much how ketosis affects your period, it's about what ketones and fat does to your hormones. Those hormones affect your menstrual cycle. A period is a very delicate thing anyway. It's so easy for irregularities to happen. So if you're heavily stressed, the hormone cortisol can be high, and that can literally change the length, the flow, and the timing of your period. And they can go one or two ways depending on the person. Your flow could be heavier, it could be lighter, it could be a longer period, or alternatively your body could perceive the abundance of cortisol as an emergency and put your body into a state where it doesn't want you to get pregnant, therefore stopping periods because it thinks there's an emergency. And cortisol can really affect your sort of mental well-being as well, and the emotional changes. Then there's medications such as contraceptives, blood thinners, anti-inflammatory drugs, chemotherapy, thyroid medication, and hormone replacement therapy that can all have a huge effect on your period and your hormones. Then there's being very underweight, there's excessive exercise, there's eating disorders, there's thyroid gland disorders, there's having an excess of androgen, endometriosis, fibroids, and diabetes that can all change your hormones and thus how your period functions. So a lot of the time, when you go and see a doctor, they will suggest a change in lifestyle. So exercise more, sleep better, take up meditation so that you have less stress, and most importantly, specifically for this video, a change in your eating lifestyle. It is already known that sugar can wreak havoc on a lot of things, from your hormones through to menstruation. So eating high sugar foods, including carbohydrates, constantly leads you to these insulin spikes. That insulin spike is quite literally disturbing ovulation. And what it does is it actually prevents hormones from triggering ovulation, meaning that progesterone is not created. And this is one of the huge things that causes a hormonal imbalance. A glucose and an insulin spike will disrupt ovulation, preventing your hormones from triggering ovulation and therefore preventing progesterone from being created because there's no ovulation. And usually because there's no progesterone, this leads to a estrogen dominance. Low levels of progesterone means that not only could your period go on for a lot longer than anticipated, it means you can gain weight more easily, you could have a higher chance of breast or ovary cancer, your libido might just plummet through the floor, you may have more water retention and swelling due to the aldosterone receptors not being blocked. And most importantly, without progesterone, you are losing a hormone that binds to GABA receptors and helps decrease the symptoms of many mental health issues. Another important note is how high carb affects your body. As I've spoken about before, if you're constantly eating high sugar or high carbohydrate foods, your body cannot holds it all in the liver because there's too much. So it will convert sugar into fatty acids to then be transported and stored in your fat cells as fat. If you want a better explanation on that, I've linked down below my What is Ketosis video where I explain all of that and how it works in much more depth. Now the reason this is important is because fat cells can hold onto and secrete estrogen, especially when there's an estrogen dominance because of a hormone imbalance. So the more high sugar you eat, the more fat cells you have, the more estrogen there is held in those fat cells, and the more those fat cells will potentially make estrogen, meaning again you're causing more of a hormonal imbalance, more estrogen dominance. Then on top of that, if you suffer with polycystic ovarian syndrome, also known as PCOS, PCOS is usually caused by insulin resistance and sugar. Polycystic ovarian syndrome just adds to the already mass list of things that can make this hormonal time worse. So by eating a diet that consists of insulin spikes, a high carb, low fat diet, you're promoting even more negative side effects of something that has so many negative side effects already naturally. And this is where ketosis comes in. I'm going to talk about what to expect and things you should be aware of if you're doing ketosis as somebody who has periods. So firstly, let's talk the positives. If you're struggling to get a period for whatever reason, ketosis might help start it up again. But this depends on what causes the lack of said period. You should be more mentally stable during periods on ketosis, less mood swings. The horrible side effects such as cramp, fatigue, and joint pain should be lowered in severity, and in some cases may disappear completely. Your fertility will increase, which I guess you could see as a positive and a negative, depending on whether you want children or not. Your polycystic ovarian syndrome, if you have it, should lower in severity. And after a while of ketosis, once your body's used to it, you should have a perfectly normal and balanced menstruation cycle. If you picked up on that, you just noticed that I said after a while of doing ketosis. And this is where it's important to look at how ketosis will affect periods in the long run, but more importantly, short term. And this is important because a lot of people will discredit ketosis, not just because of periods, but they will discredit the entirety of ketosis because of the negative effects that happen in the first couple of weeks, even though they become exponentially positive after that period. Excuse the pun. When you start a ketogenic diet, all of your hormones kind of just go on this crazy ride because you're so used to one metabolic state, which is glucose burning, you're changing to a different metabolic state, fat burning. It's going to take work, and that work requires hormones to get everything functioning properly. So yeah, you're going to go on a wild ride of negative symptoms for 1 to 2 weeks. Though you may hear people say that it was a low-carb diet that disrupted their period in the first place, the evidence from this is mainly anecdotal. I've only seen one very, very small study on it. So the reasons keto initially throws your hormones all over the place in terms of estrogen, the most important and the biggest one is if you are using keto to lose weight. As I said earlier, your fat cells secrete estrogen. If they're secreting estrogen, it means they must hold estrogen. And as I said, they can actually make estrogen if needs be. If you are losing fat cells really rapidly on a ketogenic diet, as it tends to be, you are dumping estrogen into your bloodstream. So this will cause a hormone imbalance for a brief amount of time because you've got excessive estrogen swimming around. And a lot of those in keto say that their periods came early, lasted longer, jumped a month, the flow was heavier, lighter. It really, really does vary from person to person. But the one thing that isn't unusual is having this disruption, this imbalance in your period when you start ketosis. It's absolutely perfectly normal to have these imbalances when you start keto. The most important thing is to stick with it. Let your body do its thing. Keto does affect your cycle negatively. It does disrupt it, but it's only short term. And your body will begin to regulate your hormones and get things to a good state, potentially better than they were prior to ketosis. So when you come out the other end, your cycle should be better than it's ever been. Many people in the community say that they got a good regular cycle, better than they've ever had, about 2 to 3 months after starting ketosis, along with other positives such as less mood swings, less pain, better fertility. Now, talking about fertility, many people take birth control. Some people do take birth control to stop periods. There is a chance you might start bleeding again. Again, perfectly normal, will sort itself out after a small amount of time. And in reality, if it doesn't go back to normal, there's very likely another stressor at play here that isn't ketosis, such as too much exercise, you're not eating enough, you're very stressed, you've got hyperthyroidism, or you've got a pre-existing hormonal imbalance. It's not fair to blame keto for these causes that are nothing to do with ketosis. They just happen to coexist beside ketosis in some people. I would personally suggest, if this is the case and your period is still very irregular, that you stay on ketosis, but you go and see your doctor and have tests done that will help you find out why you're having irregular cycles. Now, let's talk about things that you should be aware of. Ketosis will not suddenly turn your periods into super positive, happy things like the Tampax adverts. There is absolutely a chance you will still gain weight on ketosis when you're on your period. Weight gain is very, very common during this time. As far as scientists are aware of, there's no actual known cause as to why this is. The best thing you can do is expect it. Don't step on the scales, hide them if it's too tempting, stay in nice baggy comfy clothes, and just watch what you eat a little bit more until your period passes. And it's probably not best not to look in the mirror, because you will probably still bloat a little bit. Bloating, again, is a common change of it's just a hormonal side effect during this time. You may still experience cravings. It's very usual to have cravings of something incredibly salty or incredibly sweet during your period. Salty snacks are not really a problem for us in keto. You got bacon, bone broth, pork rinds, even salted nuts are better than many other salted choices out there. It's the sweet food that can be the problem, especially if you're experiencing negative side effects. You might not really be in the mood to search the internet for a recipe and then actually make the recipe. Like, you might just not fancy it, like just want something sweet but not have to put the effort in. If you know your period is coming, and I know that's not as simple as that, especially with the irregularities at the beginning of keto, but if you know your period is coming, I highly suggest you bake something prior and save it for that time. Otherwise, there's relatively low carb ice creams out there, things like peanut butter, there's dark chocolate, there's even, berries that you can have that are super, super sweet. It is possible to have quick, sweet snacks during this time. Talking about cravings, another important thing is hunger. You will likely be more hungry during this time. Again, this is normal and it's not necessarily a bad thing, providing you make healthier choices in terms of your macronutrients. This shouldn't have a detrimental effect to your weight, even if you're eating just a little bit more. However, with that being said, there are two things you should take into consideration with all this potential bloating and weight gain. Number one is you shouldn't experiment too much. When you start something new, obviously, as you know, if you're in keto, you tend to have a lot of digestion problems alongside the other issues because your body has to get used to what it's doing that's new. So if you're planning to, say, give up dairy, go vegetarian, fast for a few days, you want to reconsider doing that if you're about to start your period or you're on your period, especially whilst it's not stable in the early days of keto. You shouldn't be experimenting in the early days of keto anyway. Just be careful, because this could add to the already grueling stomach problems you might have during your period. And number two, if you are having a lot of bowel or stomach issues during this time, which is, again, very normal, you should think about what you're eating in terms of time it takes to digest the food. So, for example, cooked vegetables take about 40 minutes to go from the mouth through to the intestines, whereas cooked pork takes about 5 hours to do the same process. Some people are more prone to bad stomach issues when they're menstruating. Protein takes longer to digest, especially red meat. It's just something to think about if you have a lot of stomach issues during your period. And let's not forget about blood sugars. This one is only kind of really important to note if you are doing ketosis because you're diabetic. Having higher or lower results of blood sugars during your period is not unusual. Once again, the reason for this is just massive ups and downs in your hormones. If you've noticed a surge or a drop in your bloods, this is a normal thing, and it should subside once your hormones go back to normal levels. You should, however, just be a little bit more wary at this time and check your bloods more often and do the appropriate thing depending on your blood levels. And really interesting, last little note, is that a lot of what I've just said can actually happen when you're premenopausal or you are entering menopause. But that's a video for another day. One last thing before I summarise, before I forget. I heard a lot of people in this community and a few specialists talking about vitamin K and the fact that you should consume more of it during your period. A lot of people swear by eating a few cups of raw spinach a day when they're on their period, and the reason for this is spinach has got great vitamin K levels in it, and vitamin K actually helps clot blood, which will make your periods lighter. So, with all of that being said, keto is not a cure-all kind of thing. You may still get heavier or lighter periods. Here and there, you might miss periods. And in terms of Shark Week, keto is there to help normalise it. And cramps and other side effects are very, very normal. Keto might just help subside that pain a little bit. Also, keep in mind that your diet might not be to blame at all. Missed periods can be a sign of a larger health issue. Genetic abnormalities, hormonal imbalances, polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you lose your cycle, ketogenic or not, go and talk to your doctor. As always, I'm not a registered dietitian, doctor, practitioner, anything professional. I'm just a young man who's been doing this for quite a few years responsibly. I have a love for science and keto. And if that deters you, I'm more than happy to direct you to actual doctors that will tell you the exact same thing I do. That's all for this video. Like this video if you found it interesting, insightful or helpful. Subscribe if you're inclined, and if you hit the bell it will tell you when I upload. Any questions, any comments, any queries, anything down below. Keep calm, keep it warm. Thanks for watching.